today we have the pleasure to host Professor Petar Popović. He is an associate professor at the University of Zagreb at the School of Political Science. He is a professor of international relations. This lecture is an open lecture in the framework of the project named ValEUs. ValEUs Project, you have heard about this project. It involves 20 universities from 17 countries in 5 continents. Professor Popović has written, of course, interesting articles and books, and of course, I'll inform you about his all the bibliography. But I want to just recall that he has written just recently an interesting article on the status quo, a concept that is maybe has to be discussed at the end of your lecture. Maybe we'll have also the opportunity to discuss about this concept. But the title of the lecture is Peace in a Post-Liberal Order, in international relations, of course. And so I give him the floor, and I thank him to be here with us. So please.
Thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here, and I thank my colleagues for giving me this opportunity. And I hope we are going to have a interesting discussion maybe. And what I'm here to talk about is part, obviously, of my research, but also part of the ValEUs project, as my esteemed colleague has just mentioned. The title is actually too broad. 2 things about the title. First, it is about peace in a post-liberal world. Post-liberal world order. Peace was coined by the authority, I think, in peace studies, that's Oliver Richmond, looking at various ways of how peace in contemporary era is being built, conducted. And but this is not going to be a lecture established in the peace literature, but rather from what I do, that is international relations theory. And second thing, which is not in the title, this is actually a research, a presentation on the war on Ukraine and how to bring that war to a close. So let me start with the question, which might sound overly trivial or banal or maybe even rhetorical, is why cannot we achieve peace? Why is peace elusive? Why, after so many attempts, and there were since 2022 and the full-scale invasion of Russia, why every initiative so far failed? Well, as I said, the question might sound rhetorical because the answer on the outset is clear. The reason why peace cannot be achieved is simply because Russia doesn't want and actually cannot finish this war now. It cannot for various reasons, because the main reason is obviously this war is not fought for territory. Even if Donald Trump gives him on a silver platter those 25% of territories in Donbas that he wants, this is not the goal of Russian war. What are Russians' interests in Ukraine? Why are they fighting this war? We know this. Putin told us in December 2021, when he issued the ultimatum to NATO and America, were basically stating that in this ultimatum that NATO should de facto return to the borders pre-1997, and Ukraine should be demilitarized, neutral, and possibly with Moscow-friendly government. 4 years later, we are far away from that, in a sense that now there is the biggest border, the longest border with NATO, that's Finland. We have militarized Europe, which is further remilitarizing. I don't know about it, but there are speculations that even now Poland is beginning its nuclear program for known reasons, as well as if Donbass completely is annexed, there is going to be demilitarized line with coalition of the willing or whichever forces that are going to be placed there. Plus, if you've seen the last 28-point plan presented in November, Ukraine should, and this was agreed, enter European Union. And as we all know, this war in 2014 began because of the accession in European Union, not NATO. So, as I say, for obvious reasons, we know why this war continues and there will be no peace in near future. However, for us in international relations, what is interesting here in this case, and if you look this situation holistically in a broader sense, then you will see that what's actually happening here is not just, you know, problem between two states fighting this war of attrition. Rather, it is the clash of two ideas, of two concepts of peace, and what kind of the peace is going to emerge afterwards. Now, we are living in an era where, which is at the turning point regarding international order, liberal international order, and Ukraine in that sense is extremely important because very much likely is that whatever kind of a peace is going to be agreed is going to set normative standards for the future and for the future order. So we are here talking about two doctrinal concepts also clashing, which makes this war even more unlikely to settle the peace. And I'll explain why. But to present these two ideas of peace, which is also the question of the future of international order, I just have to now go very basic on international relations theory to cover some basic concepts of how peace and international order begins and is created. So you can find this in many books, the whole this is like a common knowledge, but maybe John Inkenbury in his Liberal Leviathan presented this the best. So there are three ways how peace emerges. First, when two sides fight and they are in an approximate symmetry of power, they just decide that the war is impossible for either side to win, so they decide to make a compromise and agree. This is called the balance of power peace. This is the peace simply, you cannot prevail over your enemy, therefore you have to talk with him. The other concept is victor's peace. So that when one side is strong enough, completely defeats the other side, and then implements his vision, his rules, his norms, and everything else that goes with such peace treaties, like accession of territories, whatever. And then it becomes the victor's peace. And this type of peace is mostly associated with imperialism, right? So it is a negative kind of a peace for simple reasons. You defeat everyone around you and then there's peace, right? So that's how you get Pax Romana, Pax Ecclesia, Pax Britannica, Pax Americana, Pax Sovietica, and so on. But then there is the third type of peace. Now, the third type of peace is the peace where when one side does defeat the other, but decides to self-constrain, decides to reintroduce the defeated party into the order that it's building. That's called constitutional peace, constitutional order, which is based on international law, international rules, and this kind of peace is mostly considered as liberal peace, right? Although I must say that it does not necessarily can be reduced only to liberalism. There is one historical example when we had something which was not liberal. That was Peace of Vienna in 1915. The Treaty of Holy Alliance. Am I being on? The Peace of Holy Alliance, for example, the Vienna Peace Treaty, and after the fall of Napoleon, and the Treaty of Holy Alliance. If you look at it, this was actually readmitting France into the Society of States and creating a conservative order. I suggest, like wholeheartedly, you should read the Treaty of Holy Alliance. First, it's beautifully written, and second, it does show the common values that all the states share. And although it was a balance of power system, there was a reason why that was a long century of peace, because of these conservative values that were shared by powers plus France that was introduced. So it's not strictly liberal. Now, when you have these three types of how peace can emerge and order built, basically they can be categorized into camps. So if you look at these first two types, the balance of power and victor's peace, the hegemonic peace, they emerge from structural relations, right? It's the power relations. So you recognize the power relations, which means it's empirical, which is why these types of peace are connected with realism. The other type of peace is the peace which is, the other type of peace is the peace which is based on free will. It's based on agency, not structure. This is the peace where one side consciously self-restrains in order to build constitutional order, and that's, it is liberal or idealist in a broader sense. So how does these two concepts then, if we think that this is the clash of the concepts over Ukraine, where liberal peace is being promoted by Europe, West in general, and at least now some aspects of some opposition within political elites in America, and Russia obviously pursuing the peace of victor's peace, realist peace. How does this play out? When we go beneath the surface, apply these concepts, and look what is actually at stake. So the liberal peace that European Union, especially, and the West in general, is promoting in a war in Ukraine is, and you heard it many times, it's now a phrase, just and lasting peace. You've heard that, right? Just and lasting peace. Now, what does it mean, just and lasting peace? Just would mean that it's according of international law. That means that territorial state has to be integral, right? Integrity, territorial integrity, that's UN Charter. Just also means that we are living in a free world where every nation has a right to self-determination. They can freely choose their way. So if, for example, Ukraine wishes to go in a direction of integration with Europe and NATO, it should do so, right? So if you look at that aspect of peace, that is exactly the reason why Russia is fighting this war. Now, more interestingly, lasting peace. What does it mean, lasting peace? A few years ago, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of European Commission, she said, and I quote, "The peace plan for Ukraine should not contain seeds of the future conflict." Anyone has any idea who she took that from? Who is she paraphrasing? That the peace agreement should not have any, seeds or like internal reservations that in the near future might again lead to a renewed conflict. Any ideas where she got that from? That's actually Immanuel Kant. And if you take his famous perpetual peace, which is divided in 2 sections, 6 preliminary articles and 3 definite articles, when you open the book, first preliminary article, so the first thing you see, the first article of perpetual peace is that the peace treaty should not have seeds of the future conflict, which means that in practice, what it can't mean by this? How do we get the lasting peace that there are no seeds of the future conflict, that no side is reserved? Well, if you look at general liberal idea, and this goes from Kant to Michael Doyle and the democratic peace theory, it can only be in a democratic states, which means that the state, which is democratic, offers people what they need, that is political participation, freedom, ownership, free market, and everything that goes along with liberal values. And if people are free and in a state, that means also responsibility. And if you ask people whether they want to fight a war, they would, as Kant says, to think twice. So to have a lasting peace with Russia basically means that this peace should be made, and just think about it, to have a peace between Russian people and Ukrainian people. There are 2 parliaments signing a peace treaty together because they don't want to fight the war. Now, this is obviously what it implies. The liberal idea implies that the problem here is Putin regime. And if you think about it, the expansion of NATO and European Union, in what way does this at all threaten Russia? It doesn't. It only threatens the kleptocratic authoritarian regime that's running it, right? So the idea here is that you should have democratic regime where people rule, the government comes from the people, and then you can have this peace, which means basically that in these conditions, in this state of war, it means that you necessarily will have to have total victory over Putin regime. This is not foreign to European leaders. If you have been listening to Kaja Kallas, she openly said the kind of peace we need to have is the peace through strength. What does it mean, peace through strength? If you look at peace through strength together with just and lasting peace, these 2 things don't go together, because peace through strength is actually victor's peace. But the problem is why they don't go together, because this type of peace presupposes just and lasting peace, like in the case of defeating Napoleon, like in the case of defeating Hitler, right? So when you hear this extremist right-wing populists in Europe accusing Brussels of being a war party, technically they're correct, they're right. But that's not even the issue here. The real issue here is that to have this kind of a peace, and this is even bigger problem, to have this kind of a peace, you have to have all other states on board. This is what it really means to have a status quo. You cannot have just and lasting peace if it's not multilateral peace. And that's the main issue. Because every order, every peace, if it's constitutional, the third type, it needs to have a legitimacy of all parties involved. And what's happening with international liberal order, as you well know, it's collapsing. It's over. In economic terms, institutional terms, political terms, and even in the aspect of peace building, it's over. I'll just consider this detail. There was no single UN peacekeeping mission in over a decade now. And we are living in times of more wars than ever since the Second World War. IISS, in its report for 2023 to 24, wrote that there are 183 conflicts altogether in the world at the moment, and no single UN peacekeeping mission, in a decade. The last was in Haiti. Actually, that's in Haiti in 2017 was you shouldn't even consider that a new peace mission, because it is a successor to an older one. The last were Mali in 2013 and the Central African Republic 2014, and that's it. So the liberal international order for certain is collapsing, which is making this whole peace project for Ukraine, at least from the aspect of Europe and its values, very difficult now to achieve. And even more so, it is not that Europe is now defending Ukraine, it is defending precisely these values upon which liberal world order was created. Now, how did it come to this? Well, for very specific reasons. If you go back to Boutros Ghali and his 1992 agenda for peace, where the blueprint for peace building, peace project, the peace building and peace and conflict resolution was laid out, in 30 years, not much has been achieved. There were few cases that were successful, maybe East Timor in 1999. Bosnia and Herzegovina comes to mind, but it's not really a success story. Dayton Agreement, I mean. So, and especially after 2000, when you look at Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, this has been what Oliver Richmond said. It was one big promise that did not deliver liberal peace. So, and if you go to the reasons why, which I cannot go in now, I'll just say that if you read this literature, there is a common agreement that the main reason was it was top-down. It was implemented upon the warring parties, the conflict resolution in a way to, because the point of the liberal peace is you have to move the root causes of conflict. If you eliminate them, then there will be peace. It was coming top-down. And especially after 2000 and the policies of regime change, most of the people on the ground fighting were seeing this conflict resolution as a kind of new Western imperialism, new colonialism, and so on. So this was a failure. So obviously, for very important reasons, liberal peace has had problems since its inception after the end of the Cold War. But in its stead, now we are seeing the rise of this realist type of peace, the authoritarian type of peace building, which is based not on conflict resolution, so that the international community tries to bring warring parties to a just and lasting peace in a way to remove the roots of the conflict, but through the conflict management. Now, conflict management is a realist way of doing peace. It is a negative type of peace. It is the peace which is neither peace nor war. It is just the absence of war. Conflict management goes along the way of, containing the extremes of violence, basically keeping the situation under control and as a sort of frozen conflict. Now, why is this important to consider now, the new dawn of realist peace and conflict resolution? Because if you look throughout the modern history, or modern international history, since the 17th century, you will see that conflict resolution and realist peace is actually the norm of international politics, modern international politics. Liberal peace is the exception. It had its opportunity in the last 30 years, and that's it. But this is the norm. Look at the 18th century, right? So balance of power, the politics of balance of power was a kind of a prototype of conflict resolution. Cold War gave birth to a modern type of conflict resolution. Just consider Korea, right? So they are like in peace, which is still since 1953 an ongoing ceasefire, and the typical example of conflict resolution. So now, since over the past decade, we have seen the rise of new actors which are involved in this type of conflict resolution of realist, from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, China, Russia, and this kind of conflict resolution is gaining momentum. And according to an IR scholar, David Lewis, the state, the power that actually inaugurated this type of realist peace was Russia after 2015. Now he looked how Russia behaved and how Russia was involved in conflict management since its intervention in Syria, in Afghanistan, Mali, Nagorno-Karabakh, and some other places. And he said it's very in his article he shows how this is very complex, but he tried to deduce the main points, the pattern that's emerging that can define what kind of a new kind of a peace are we having. And he said that there are three to four major characteristics of this type of peacemaking. First is it is normalizing the use of force. So you can see Russia using force or threatening to use force against those where it's mediating. Second is it's strictly bilateral, right? So it's bilateral in a sense that no international organizations, no institutions are involved, and it's only Russia. And third, it's so to speak, extracting value. It's an interested party in a conflict. It has to get something from the warring parties. So, and there is a fourth one, which is strictly political. It is obviously openly Russia saying that liberal international order does not function anymore, and that this is the way, the model that is actually bringing peace in the conflict areas. Now, this is what the literature calls authoritarian conflict management. Now, we enter Donald Trump and his peace initiative for Ukraine. You probably are not hearing much in the news anymore about that, because that has been gone and over actually since April of last year. So a year ago, this initiative was basically that. But what was actually, what is Donald Trump's style? What is his peace initiative? Now, if you look at from the beginning, from the early 2025, you have to go back to that period after his inauguration, where he immediately launched the initiative for Ukraine. You remember that it was mostly in the media said that he doesn't have a plan, that it is a chaos, that he's unpredictable, erratic. Some even say that he adores Putin, so he's ready to, let Ukraine, sell Ukraine to the Russians. But if you consider this concept, which Nick Hynek and Oliver Richmond have developed, and this is something that goes beyond traditional authoritarian conflict management, what they call revisionist conflict management, you will note that there is actually a methodology behind the chaos. Now, what is the difference between revisionist conflict management and authoritarian conflict management? Authoritarian conflict management is well known, as I explained, what that meant historically, and in this sense, how Russia is using it in contemporary terms. But revisionist conflict management is different in one significant aspect. It introduces economic profit. It introduces transaction. So to everything that is known about conflict resolution, conflict management, revisionist conflict management introduces the idea of extracting profit, economic private profit from the warring parties. Now, as Hynek and Richmond define some of the characteristics of this type of conflict management, peace is merely an empty signifier. This means that it is a commodity. Everything is for sale: people, land, territories, peace, justice as such. Everything is negotiable and for profit. Very important and very interesting. This type of negotiation, while authoritarian conflict management is still state-based, you know, in a sense that it's the ruling regime which is running all the shots with its diplomatic corps and its representatives. In this type, the American type, you see the emergence of shadow private figures, quasi-mediators. So when you come to think of it, think of Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the private private figure and his affinity fund, which actually is delegated to negotiate in the Middle East and in Ukraine on the behalf, nobody knows who, United States as a state or private business of Donald Trump. And this privatization, this outsourcing of sovereignty is actually something that Russia is now being involved into as well. Because if you look over the past year, the negotiations on a state level there were not much of them. But if you look what is in constant, that is the negotiations between Trump's personal friend and his partner in real estate development, Steve Witkoff, with who? With Kirill Dimitrov, who is the sovereign fund manager of Russia. So it is kind of this mudding between private and public for personal gain and interest. And so what is the purpose of peace? What is the purpose? Why to have then peace? To have this kind of a joint venture security to turn Ukraine to extract value from it for the kleptocratic and oligarchic elites of both United States and Russia. Well, yes, that's the reason, and that was the first motive why Donald Trump was at the beginning interested in having peace. Now, there are political reasons why Trump needed immediately to have peace with Ukraine for his own political agenda at home, economic agenda. Because the problem was, in order to introduce economic reforms through so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which is the biggest tax cut in history, he needed to cut all the funding, unnecessary funding, and one of these was indeed support for Ukraine. And then not to show that he's selling Ukraine by putting cutting aid to military aid to Ukraine to zero, he needed to have peace, right? So immediately he entered the peace initiative and negotiations, and now, as I said, there is a method to revisionist conflict management, which you can see in the format of negotiations. Now go back to March 2025, when the peace negotiations began. You might remember that it was said that he is involved, that he's pursuing what is known as shuttle diplomacy. Anybody knows what shuttle diplomacy is? It's a type of diplomacy. It's a format of negotiating, actually popularized by Henry Kissinger during the Arab-Israeli wars in the 70s, where because two sides are in an active conflict, you cannot bring them at the same table. So you are separately negotiating with each side, and then moving from one side to another, transferring proposals and messages and everything that's and trying to find a peace by constantly migrating between two sides. So similar thing happened in Dayton when the Bosnian peace was being agreed. Bosnian, Serbian, and Croatian side rarely sat at the same table. It was rather Richard Holbrooke going from room to room, negotiating and trying to find a compromise. Now, that would indeed be so, because as you know, in the beginning of negotiations, Russia and Ukrainian side did never sat together at the table, but United States was negotiating parallel, separately with each other. Now, that would be a shuttle diplomacy. The thing is, one important difference between traditional shuttle diplomacy, which this is only in format, is that in this case, United States is not a mediator, it is the third interested party that has its own interest separately negotiating with two sides. So if you look at the content of those negotiations, you will see that actually a peace in Ukraine is of secondary matter. Negotiations between United States and Ukraine were over the mineral deal. Between Russia and United States was about opening economic relations, rapprochement, even Iran. Iran was a big issue in the first meetings in Riyadh, and joint ventures in North Pole and whatnot. So obviously, United States the method is to get both sides to make commercial deals, and that's how Donald Trump tried to put this peace, which is not peace, which is just simply a ceasefire. That's why he was insisting on ceasefire, because this is a conflict management, which is actually a pattern that was already seen in his first term. If you go back in his first term, you can look at least two examples of normalization of relations where US was mediating under Trump, where this method was implemented. So take, say, Abraham Accords, right? One of the big issues to get Arab states to normalize relations with Israel was to make commercial deals with the United States. So, for example, Morocco. United States recognized Morocco's illegal occupation of Western Sahara, and Morocco had to buy billion worth of weaponry from military-industrial complex, American military-industrial complex. And that's how the normalization of relations came. The other example that same year, 2020, is the Washington agreements between Kosovo and Serbia, right? So how did Trump made this deal to normalize economic relations between Serbia and Kosovo, where Serbia does not recognize at all Kosovo's relations? That they separately made investment agreements with the United States, Exim Bank, and there were other actors involved. And also, United States put some other stuff in its interest, like that they shouldn't have G5, that they should proclaim Hamas to be a terrorist organization. Some stuff completely of interest only to United States, not to these two sides. So the logic, the idea in this peace building that Trump is inaugurating is that you will have two sides in conflict who just need to enter a ceasefire. And once they enter a ceasefire, they will make economic, commercial relations with the United States, which is going to make them interdependent. And in that sense, it will be completely irrational to break a ceasefire. Why? Because then you are violating a very promising, very profitable relation you're having with the United States. That's the whole logic. And I mean, this is perfectly summarized in, you remember in late February last year when Zelensky and Trump had that big fallout, that quarrel in the White House. Before that quarrel, they were talking, and Trump said something very significant, because the thing was Zelensky was trying to at any cost get security guarantees in the deal. And Trump told him, no, just having our companies, our corporations inside of Ukraine is going to be security guarantee itself. This is the essence of this type of peace building. As I said, this was done by March. It was over for very known reasons. Every ceasefire on table, Russia violated, because Russia, as I said in the beginning, Russia, as you all know, wants to continue fighting this war. Zelensky and Ukraine realized that this is an opportunity, so they signed a deal with the mineral deal on it was 30th of April. In May, big beautiful bill came in Congress. If you have been following, one congressman said very interestingly, said, how are you planning to have economic growth while fighting war with states having no revenues? Which meant obviously that from that point on, peace initiative was done. Trump cut all aid to Ukraine by mid of that year to zero. Europe now completely took over in supporting Ukraine. And now with today, everything else that came afterwards was, from that moment on, it was obvious that everything else was just a show. There was no need to follow what was happening in Alaska, later in Miami, and now with beginning of this year with Venezuela, and now with Iran. Obviously, Ukraine war is not anymore on the agenda or on the list of priorities of Donald Trump. So where does this leave us? These types of two peace concepts that are clashing over Ukraine with peace that is liberal, promoted by European Union in the conditions, in the context of decaying liberal international order, and the realist peace, which has evolved from authoritarian conflict management to revisionist conflict management. Now, there are authors like Stacy Gabbard and Abraham Newman, which are saying that what Trump is inaugurating, and this goes against any of you who think that we are entering multipolar world, that we are returning to some kind of Westphalian balance of power. They are wrong, because we are not. What these authors have shown is we are returning to what is known as long 16th century, where state was not as still strong, where when the peace agreement was signed, it was between princes, not between states, because state in a modern sense was not as yet developed. And when you look at this private-public mixture and this parallel lines of negotiations like that you have with Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dimitrov, unfortunately, this looks to be the future. As we mentioned in the beginning, we are part of the ValEUs group. As I said, this is something that we now have to think about, because it's not really about discussing what are European values, what are liberal values. We also have to discuss how to defend them in this day and age of grave danger of collapsing world order and the return to more historical types of not really not really stable, lasting, just types of peace we have. So yes, thank you. And,